Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Flinchbaugh, host of the People Solve Problems podcast, and we have Cheryl Jekiel from, we'll introduce her in a bit here, but Cheryl, welcome. Glad to see you.
Hello.
So we go back quite a ways. I think really knew you first before the book, but as author of the Lean Human Resources book. I've also written Let Go to Lead, and you're the CEO and founder of the Lean Leadership Center. I've said for a long time, and we won't talk only about lean stuff, but lean is a human system. And so therefore we need, human resources involved. And you were probably the most prominent voice to help elevate that whole conversation. So thank you for that.
You're most welcome. I always felt like the lone wolf out there, but
yep. Yeah, I did. I wrote a paper for AME long time ago about this and about HR and, just trying to stimulate the conversation. We've seen a lot of progress, so it's good to see. So we're going to talk today a little bit about a different kind of problem solving. Really, it's sort of this open-ended, ill-defined, complex problem solving that involves creating a product or service, which you've recently gone through as a service provider, and all the nuances and steps around doing that, and how we think about this as a form of problem solving. So for starters, let's jump to the end point, because you've launched a new product. Why don't you just give us a snapshot about what that offering looks like?
In general, it's a leadership development system, I would say. It's a blend of helping leaders build their coaching skills. It's actually also it's the people part of problem solving. The same content does that. And it's also ended up to be a great way to help organizations implement anything, because the same things that solve a people problem prevent a people problem.
Yes.
When you're implementing a strategy, it's kind of like, let's just do it right the first time from the people part. That solves a lot of stuff.
Right.
That's hard done.
No, even on a simple basis, if everybody was focused on how do we hire more people, and it's like, well, how do we retain them first, right? Think about that. So that's the end product. So that's where you ended up. But let's start then, go back to the beginning. Really tell us about what gap did you see in the market, or in companies and clients, in offerings, what gap did you see that said, you know what, I think we need a different solution here. We need a different product. And so how did you see that gap, and how did you define that gap?
It was actually two problems that came up it's a bit of the Reese's peanut butter cups. It was like two things that had to come together. One was, from at that point, 25 years of doing continuous improvement, seeing that the leaders in more traditional workplaces really struggled to shift their style. As you would come in and do problem solving and get everyone involved and kick up participation, you'd end up with a leadership team that just didn't know how to shift their gears. The way they understand themselves, I'm here because you put me in charge because I solve problems. And so turning that over to my team solves the problems. For some, it's like they were born this way. For 80% or better, they weren't born that way. They don't understand. And I just kept watching the difficulty. It was obvious the need for leaders to shift, just getting them to shift was really hard. So that was one problem. The second is, I'd been the head of HR for many years and did not like any of the products on the open market for leadership, basically like what you'd call first line supervisory training. So this isn't the cool stuff like, all the various kinds of things out here that are great leadership development things. It's these basics. When you wanted to teach people how to lead, they were too short, too little, didn't necessarily fit well. Most of it doesn't work. A lot of it came in at a first line supervisory level, except everybody above them can't actually do any of these skills. So like, go train the new ones, but no one else can give feedback either. So two problems it was intended to solve. I guess it ended up solving. But
yeah, and I like that, because again, a lot of problem solving is like, narrowly define the problem and then go look for root cause. But you can't go create some of these things without looking at the confluence of different problem sets that come together and need new solutions. And that first one I'm very familiar with. One of my former company co-founders, Denny Pauly, one of the best leaders I've ever worked with, but he grew up in the automotive industry with, you know, 4-letter word leadership. And as we were transforming Chrysler, we always said he never became Mary Poppins, but he significantly transformed his leadership style in a way that really lifted the company in tremendous ways. And, you know, it's really proof that no matter how well established your leadership is, there's opportunities to change. And that same company that Denny and Andy Carlino and I co-founded, similar thing. We looked at the offerings out there and said, we don't like what there is, and let's go create that. So I like how those two problems come together. So as you got into it and said, okay, here's a gap, how did you kind of organize the problems you were trying to solve? Did you break it into sub problems? Did you start with the end in mind and work back? So how did you organize your problem solving and creation process with all of that in mind?
Yeah, so it's when I started, I was working with the state of Illinois, and actually where all the motivation came from to stop everything and work on this is they were putting in first line supervisory training in an environment. They were putting in continuous improvement or lean, and they were doing it so badly. I was like, I have to rescue them. I was like, I have to stop this from happening. And so I started developing things. And if I were to think about how it came to be something much better, is I reached out for help from people who specialize in adult learning. I got a lot, like I had several people assist with strengthening the approach, getting more and more clear what would people need to be able to do and what does it take for them to be able to practice a skill. So a lot of the last several years have been solving the problem of how people learn. Because I think a lot of training is not very effective at addressing how people learn of all kinds. Like it's not just this topic. I just don't think we do a very good job sometimes of helping people learn how to do things, much
Right.
less how to be better leaders.
Right.
Like enough practice and enough support and all those things that goes into helping them be there. So the problem initially, I think the first program was 2 days, then it was 2 days and another month and 2 days. Now it's a year plus, and then they keep going and keep going. It's the way I compare it now, it's like, you know, if you're an athlete, athletes all do basics. Like I said one day, first of all, I don't follow sports. I said, what do baseball players do? And they go, drills. I'm like, yes, like drills. I think leaders need to keep practicing. I don't think they get it done. I don't think their skills hit a level and like we're done figuring out how we need to say things or how to work with people. Or I think it's an ongoing support need for leaders to stay. If you want 80% to be good at it instead of 20% to be good at it.
Right. No, I like that. And I spent a lot of time in adult learning. Yeah, I hired an instructional designer full time, and I think there's a lot to unpack there and really go into that. So that's some of the method, right, that you invested in. I do want to poke a little bit about that work you were doing with the state of Illinois. So there's sort of a compelling, right? It's one thing to wake up and just decide I'm going to sit down and start working on this problem. It's another thing when you have sort of a stimulus, a compelling reason right in front of you. So how much was that client need, that compelling reason? How much was that the impetus to get the ball rolling on this product development?
Was completely what drove it. I think really here's the experience that I hadn't seen coming is it worked. I saw some real success, and I had never seen success before in any leadership development. I would say no one was more shocked than me when it worked. But then, meaning, how would you say, well, how would you know if it worked? I got back reports from the leaders saying that they were having a very different experience. Like they had this amount of time freed up. That as they became successful at turning the problem solving over, they had a very different way that their day was being spent. And I'm like, well, that's proof something shifted. It wasn't this anecdotal, like I'm just feeling better or, you know, I handled this situation. It seemed much less anecdotal and more of a big shift. But then when I went back in 6 months, it was almost all gone. The people who had made the shift had gone back. And I was like, well, this is not good. It's not good enough. And like I said, I've gotten too cranky to do things that don't actually work in the long run. So then it was a matter of the last 5 years have been diligently in several environments, continuing to figure out what does it take for it to really stick? What does it take to make something a go-to behavior? And it's a lot. So now the product as it stands now is what we call leader led. So what we do is we try and get it in as quickly as we can, and it's taught internally. 'Cause guess what? You've heard this before. Leaders are basically, we learn what we teach. So if this was going to be a predominant skill set, it had to be taught by the people who need the skill set instead of by trainers, or instead of like the best of the teachers, or instead of like certainly an outside people. I think it's these basics of leadership need to be taught by leaders.
Mhm.
So, and it's worked well. I mean, they've adapted to it and they like doing it. So it has to be super simple, but is designed for them to be doing the teaching,
Yeah.
top to bottom, right to left.
So let's explore that a little bit more about the success you saw and kind of how you evaluated success along the way. Because it's, when you're building and testing at the same time, which not every product gets a real chance to do. It's you can start to look at evidence and you can start to see, is it working? But there's also signs of like, well, it's not working yet. And so do we stay the course? Do we go back to, do we adjust, or do we go back to first principles, right? There's, not that those are the only three options, but those are three big forks in the road to tear it back down, make some adjustments, or just keep going as you maybe get some, concerns or evidence along the way. So, as you're working on a program that of course is so dynamic, right? Human beings are messy, and it's there's no one right answer to anything. How do you evaluate the nuances and the choices along that path around, is this working, and is the design where we want to go?
I could describe where it is today and where I want it to go. How we've been evaluating it so far is the leader's sense of confidence that these more fundamentals are in place. And these things are very simple. These are the basics, like how do we set clear expectations? How do we make sure people are effectively trained? How do we provide good daily coaching and feedback and recognition to people? Like this stuff, it's not the fancy stuff, but what we've seen is almost 100% of the leaders in the workplace feel these basics they need to improve. They all say top to bottom, CEO to anybody, they're like, I need to get better at how I set people up for success, how I'm doing these basic things. So success has seemed to be like, as they've said, we're more on track. The other thing we've seen is nobody's given it back up. Like they keep doing it. Like it's not a program they put in and goes away. It just keeps going and going. It's the way we do the basics. And so that tells me another thing. They wouldn't keep doing something that wasn't adding real pragmatic value to them. Because that would be like, well, that was really nice or interesting, but let's, what do we call it? Environments have their own way of getting rid of things that don't add value. They just dump them off the roadside. So they're using it. But I've recently gone back to school for a doctorate, which at my age was not been a small undertaking. That's because I want to focus on researching the outcomes. I've become so interested in what I've observed, which isn't something I created as much as I've happened upon it. I've been lucky enough to see some observed improvements. I want to better understand them and get more scientific about understanding the outcome I'm looking at and what are the factors that drive those outcomes.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Ask me in 3 years, I'll have a different answer for you.
Well, yeah, certainly probably a longer one, right? That's usually part of it. And so not to detour too far into the doctorate, but is that decision so let's just put yourselves in the shoes of product designer, right? And you make a decision in this, I'm trying to solve this problem to go after a doctorate. Is that more out of curiosity, I want to understand, or is it more like, well, there's more layers here that I can improve the product?
Absolutely, the second. Because again, at this age, it's like my career is closer. I'm much more towards the end of my career, and people have said, why now? And I'm like, because I think this work would be much stronger if I had a better handle on the science that I'm looking at. And then from there, it would be stronger. So the thing I would leave behind would be better, would be why have put the last, I went from doing a wide variety of things to just this. I mean, I've literally, when I found it, it's all I've done. And so now I want to see it. Sometimes people, they say they study something, they find the thing that works, then they make a product. I found a product that worked. Now I want to go find out why it works. And I think from there, we'll make it much stronger. But there is a reason it's working.
Yeah, no, I like
I mean,
that.
more than one reason.
And of course, it's, I always say this about when we find something that works, the lean learner wants to understand why. The non-lean thinker just says, well, I'm inherently brilliant and I ended up on this thing that,
Yeah, that I'm clear is probably not the case. Just
Yeah.
lucky so far, I guess.
But it is, it becomes fundamental because the conditions change, right? And so you can't make adjustments and the proper tweaks and improvements if you don't really understand why something's working the way that it is, right? I give a recipe that works and then, hey, I can't get that ingredient. Well, do you stumble through it or do you understand what that ingredient brought to the table? And that's hence the research underneath it. So I like that that exploration. I won't go down my own. I almost went back to go get my PhD, and I've closed that door for reasons. But I'm always fascinated by that decision. So we just have a little bit of time left, but let's go into the participant view. So we talked about problem solving and gaps and what gaps you saw. How do participants see gaps for themselves? How do they understand them, grapple with them, explore them? How do they see what they're working on as a leader as either a gap or a set of gaps, problems to solve?
I don't think what they experience on a day-to-day basis is I need to be better at how I develop people. Like that's a nice thing to say. I just don't think that's there. What I do know is they struggle with people issues. Most of them, if you say, we have a lot of at times they'll share with other leaders, what are the people issues you're grappling with? Like either where are your people not doing what you want them to do, or where are you having people issues you're struggling with? Like somebody's doing something and I don't know how to address it, or my team's not getting along and I don't know what to do about it, or my team's not engaged and I don't. So when it comes to people problems, they almost across the board struggle with what to do about it. They usually, whatever field they're in, they have more sense of how to handle, like they can build a building, they can even solve an engineering issue, but the people part might, that's a bigger struggle. So I think that what they're experiencing is that. The other problem I came across that, again, I hadn't foreseen is the loneliness most leaders have as leaders. When I mean lonely, they spend time around others, like they'll go to lunch or they'll talk to people and they know people around them. But what they don't share very easily is that struggle with people. They may feel like I'm not that good a leader, but they don't tell anybody that. But when they tell each other that, there is this amazing thing that happens. They'll come back and they'll say, I don't feel as alone. I did not know the rest of you felt the way I do about these problems. And once they have that shared understanding, like we're all struggling, all things become possible from there. Now that's, again, not my design. That just is what happens when that happens, when you put them together. But I hadn't realized how lonely most of them were in their people struggles, that's just not something they talk to anybody about much.
Yeah, no, and my role as a sort of thought partner with different executives, I see that all the way to the top, and some of it's people issues, some of it's, if you're a first-time business unit general manager or a first-time CEO, you're putting the pieces together in ways that you never have before, and you're not an expert. You might be an expert in one of the areas of the 15, and you can very quickly feel incompetent, right? And in that realm, and kind of know that no, that's actually how you're supposed to feel when you're dealing with complex stuff. Let me just ask this. I'm really curious about this last question around people issues that they struggle with. Some people issues are special cause one-off. Like, oh, it's just this person, I've got to figure out what to do. And sometimes it's common cause, the system is broken, what I'm doing is broken for the team. And sometimes it's very hard to tell the difference. How do you help people sort out that, oh, this is an exception versus this is the system?
I mean, for a lot of it, even people I think are very good leaders, they still tend to come at things thinking there's something wrong with my people. Like they're not engaged. They just don't know why, or they're not following what I've asked them to be proactive and they're not. I just don't know why. They tend to point, there's something wrong with the people. The system we use is designed for the leader to make sure, first of all, have I been clear? 9 out of 10 of them have not been clear in what they expect and said it in a way and confirm the person understood what they expected. Now, if 9 out of 10 of the issues, that's not a leader. It means we haven't given the leaders what they need to be clear.
Right.
First, start with clarity, make sure you know what you mean. Because the first thing we'll find out, they don't know what they mean. I want them to be proactive. What does that mean? I have to think about that. Hence, you don't have it. Because if you don't know, they don't know. So a lot of it has been, I think, helping them get clear what those key things they need to check. Now, by the way, to an HR person, that's what HR work always was.
Mhm.
Someone would come and they'd say, well, we need to, this person's like, something's wrong with the person. And we'd be like, ask these questions. And so this has been actually building what would have been an HR skill set into the entire leadership group.
Right.
HR, doesn't surprise you, I think is what can be quite a waste. It can be a very long way to solve a problem by having a person clean up a mess that shouldn't have happened in the first place.
Here, here.
Here. I knew you'd like that one.
I do. I do a lot. So, Cheryl, thanks for sharing your story, your journey, and it certainly sounds like the journey will continue, and I look forward to seeing where it goes from here.
All right. Thanks so much, Jamie. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the People Solve Problems podcast. Let's keep the conversation going. Visit jflinch.com for more episodes and other content. And continue to join us on your podcast app, of course. We greatly appreciate your feedback through reviews and ratings. Consider expanding your understanding of problem solving with Jamie's book, People Solve Problems: The Power of Every Person, Every Day, Every Problem. Available on Amazon. Until next time, keep learning, innovating, and solving problems.